Gold clinked on the auction block, loud enough to drown wind and fate alike, one man trading years for one chance. He stood alone among buyers fat with coin, hat brim hiding hunger deeper than pockets. When the bidding opened, he laid every last nugget on scarred wood, her weight in raw gold, measured by trembling scales. The crowd laughed, then hushed. The auctioneer's gavel struck once, sealing freedom with the sound of a coffin nail turned inside out. She did not look up. Shackles fell, dust rose where chains had dragged. The man, no badge, no name yet offered, lifted a blanket, covering shoulders the sun had branded. In silence they left behind voices still arguing over price. Their journey stretched across plains bleached dry, a hush wide enough to hold two kinds of silence. His chosen, hers enforced. He led a sway-backed mule bearing supplies too light for distance. She carried nothing but memory, each step jarring loose another shard of yesterday's fear. At twilight he offered water, head bowed, hand steady. She drank, tasted metal and mercy. Nights brought cold. He built fires small, discreet, leaving embers to guard dreams. She slept wrapped in the same blanket that first covered her, wool smelling of smoke and something rarer, safety not yet trusted. He kept watch, eyes tracing constellations like prayer beads. Somewhere between Orion's belt and the fading North Star, he laid a wordless vow. No harm would touch her again, even if it clawed through him first. Days counted themselves by blisters, by a mended bridle strap fraying anew, by cautious glances that grew less sharp. On the sixth dusk prairie grasses bent beneath storm scent. Lightning stitched ragged seams across sky. He guided them to an abandoned line shack, for walls leaning like tired men. Rain hammered the roof, leaks formed silver strings. He set a pot beneath each, catching clean water. She watched drops fill tin, overflow into dirt, marveling at waste that felt like wealth. Morning revealed a landscape rinsed of dust, hoofprints washed away. She traced a finger along the shack wall where someone long gone had carved a name, Isaiah. She touched each letter, tasting freedom on the grain. He saw, nodded once, as if the carving echoed what could be written next. The trail angled toward his ranch, lone house rumored among traders to be more gravestone than home. When it rose from horizon, boards gray as storm clouds, she felt ribs tighten. He opened the gate with reverence, as though entering church. Wind chimes made of spent cartridges rang low. Between notes, meadowlarks answered. Inside, the house proved spare but waiting. One table, two chairs, a hearth swept clean. He placed her blanket over the only rocking chair, stepping back so distance stayed kind. On the table he left a brass key, then walked outside to tend stock. She explored. Each room held quiet so complete it pulsed. In a corner shelf a single photograph leaned, young man beside younger brother, river behind them. Same eyes as her rescuer, but smile unscarred by years. She turned it face down, sensing grief not yet thawed. He returned after dusk, carrying 2 tin plates heaped with beans and cornbread rough as fence slats. He set one plate at her chair, retreated to doorway, ate standing. When meal ended, he placed a ledger on the table, a record of debts, seed, timber, bandages. At the bottom blank lines waited. He slid a pencil across. Choice offered like water, right name, right nothing. She lifted the pencil but traced only circles, soft and looping, until lead dulled. Then she closed the ledger, left it there, and met his gaze steady for the first time. A nod passed between them, contract without signatures. Weeks unfolded. She tended garden rows long abandoned, coaxing shoots from soil that remembered better seasons. He repaired corral fencing, each hammer's strike echoing across valley. Evenings they sat opposite the hearth, silence richer now, seasoned with shared exhaustion. Her hands, once cuffed, now held seed packets. His, once empty, bore calluses fresh and honest. One dawn he found her on the porch, eyes tracking sunrise through slats. She pointed to horizon where clouds rode low. He understood, rain due by noon, barley wanting cover. They worked side by side, tarping rows before first drops hit. When downpour arrived, they stood beneath the lean-to, laughter rising sudden, startling them both with its ease. Night of the first frost, she hung dried herbs over the mantel, scent of sage wove through room, softening shadows. He placed new boots by the rocking chair, leather supple, laces untied. She touched them, then his arm, brief as moth wing but enough to light embers he thought long dead. Winter crept, but hearth stayed bright. Snow drifted, muffling outside world. In white silence she traced more circles in the ledger, each wider, until page filled. He watched, heart thudding like distant drums. When she turned a fresh page, she wrote a single letter, not full name yet, but door cracked. On solstice night he brought a cedar sapling in from cold, planted it in a pot warmed by fire. Together they pressed soil firm. She tied a ribbon around trunk, her blanket strip, frayed edge holding story. Above the mantel, the photograph now stood upright again. Ice thawed, creek sang. She rose early, saddled the mule, rode fence line alone, returned at dusk carrying wild honeycomb sticky with promise. He greeted her with coffee strong enough to melt regret. They shared the cup, mouths touching rim the same moment, heartbeat louder than wind. That evening she opened the ledger to its last page, wrote 3 words, "Freedom feels like home." She pushed the book across. He read, eyes burning, then beneath her script added 4, gold found its worth. No signatures needed, the story had signed itself. Rain visited again, gentle now. In its rhythm they moved closer, shoulders brushing as naturally as breathing. The chimes above the porch sang softer, cartridges polished by her careful hands. Garden rose burst green. Birds nested in eaves. And though the world beyond still weighed souls in coin, inside that valley gold had finished its speaking. Silence did the rest, word by living word. One late afternoon, sun low and wheat heads glowing bronze, she walked to the gate alone and untied the rope she had never dared touch. It creaked wide. Nothing waited beyond but horizon. She stood in the frame for a full breath, wind tasting her face like a question. Then she closed the gate again, latched it from inside, and turned back toward the house where a mule brayed, a kettle whistled, and a man who had spent everything still waited to see what freedom chose next. Inside, dusk painted the walls lavender, 2 cups, 1 ledger, and a cedar sapling bore witness as she stepped through the doorway and closed it against the setting sun. A simple act, yet proof enough that freedom, once offered, can choose to stay. Spring seeped into the valley like warm milk, slow and comforting. Snow melt threaded the creek, carrying silt that turned water the color of brewed tea. Each dawn, birds quarreled in the rafters, shaking straw loose to mark the hour better than any clock. The woman rose before the quarrel, laced the new boots he had left her, and crossed the yard wrapped in her patched blanket, habit, not need. She breathed the cold and named it harmless. The fields still slept under burlap tarps, but weeds woke early. She knelt, pulling thistle before roots spread. A scar along her wrist twinged with each tug. Scars have memories of their own. She whispered nothing to them, yet they eased, understanding she was busy. By the time the sun warmed her shoulders, Hawthorne rode in from the ridgeline, saddlebags rattling with seed potatoes and half-forgotten mail. He tipped his hat, offered a tin cup of creek water, waited until she drank half, then emptied the rest over the mule's dusty nose. No talk, only exchange. They planted potatoes that afternoon. He broke the clay with a shove hoe. She dropped sprouting eyes into the furrows. Luca, still skittish but learning laughter, followed, brushing soil closed with a pine branch. Wind smelled of thaw and iron. Above them a hawk drew slow circles, the same path day after day, like it was stitching a border around their land. 3 nights later Luca asked, in a voice rough as gate hinges, why the woman never sang. She ran her thumb along the rim of her cup and found no answer she wished to give. Hawthorne struck a match, lit the single lamp, and set Luca's broken harmonica on the table. With a file from his tool roll, he straightened the bent reed, rubbed beeswax into the cracks, handed it back. Luca blew 1 note, clear enough to make coyotes pause outside. The woman smiled without showing teeth. The lamp widened its circle, pushing shadows to the corners where they could do no harm. Storms rolled in from the south, tall and bruised. Rain pummeled the roof so hard it seemed to be searching for old wounds to reopen. During the worst downpour, lightning split the porch beam, hurling splinters across the yard. Hawthorne dragged the mare into the kitchen, tethered her to the cast-iron stove, and climbed into the black heart of the storm to nail a fresh plank over the scar. The woman held the ladder steady, rain stinging her eyelids until tears and sky water mixed. When he climbed down, she pressed an oilcloth to the cut on his forearm. He did not flinch, but she felt him breathe her name in a hush smaller than a sigh, the first time he had formed it out loud. It sounded new, yet right, like a calf's first stumbling step that already knows the direction of grass. Morning revealed a porch littered with cedar needles and a sky stripped clean. Luca swept debris while the woman boiled coffee thick enough to stand a spoon. The mare stomped uneasily at the open door, then backed away to graze as though the kitchen had been only a shared dream. Hawthorne replaced the split beam with cedar hewn from the burn stand, its grain smelling of pepper and smoke. Before dusk he burned one word into the fresh wood with a hot nail. Stay. She traced each letter, feeling the heat still inside. Rivers of rumor flowed through travelers. A new territorial ordinance threatened anyone harboring runaways not duly registered as freed. Mercenaries rode ahead of the law, exchanging forged badges for silver. That night Hawthorne oiled the door hinges, set a barrel behind the gate, and buried the deed to the ranch beneath the cedar sapling they had planted on solstice. The woman watched him tamp soil, realizing he trusted the young tree's thin roots more than any courthouse. A week later, 3 riders in blue-gray dusters crested the ridge. Their horses wore army shoes filed to points. Hawthorne met them halfway, palms open. Luca crouched behind the rain barrel, rifle across knees, breathing like a rabbit under hawk shadow. The woman stood on the porch, one hand on the warm cedar beam, thumb resting against the carved word. The leader dismounted, waved a printed notice. Enslaved persons must be recorded, bounty for informants. His eyes skated past Hawthorne and fixed on her, cataloging skin first, soul never. Hawthorne's voice, rusted from misuse, cut across the yard. She's my partner in crop and blood. He let silence reassure the lie's heartbeat. The rider scoffed, spat, demanded papers. The woman stepped forward, ledger in hand. She opened to the page where she had written "Freedom feels like home" and held it out like scripture. Sun glared off the page. The rider read, snorted, but the words held some power he could not parse. He closed the book, thrust it back, told Hawthorne the circuit judge would come in a month. Then he and his men wheeled south, hooves striking flint sparks all the way down the gulch. That night the woman sheared Luca's long winter hair, burning fallen locks in the stove until no scent remained. She sat on the porch rail afterward, moonlight finding the scar at her wrist. Hawthorne eased beside her, unrolled a scrap of rawhide he'd kept in his pocket since the auction. On it he'd tooled 2 shapes interlinked, her circle, his square, edges touching once then forever. He passed it to her, no ceremony. She slid it around the cedar sapling's narrow trunk, knotting ends so gently the bark did not bruise. Days shortened as if the sky itself were worried. They rose earlier, worked longer, talked in looks more than words. The potatoes flowered purple, bees drowsed between petals. Luca learned to drive the mule in patient circles around the blade harrow, singing half-remembered hymns that braided sorrow and hope into one long thread. On market day Hawthorne hitched wagon to the mare. He and the woman loaded sacks of barley and baskets of potatoes, food enough to trade, but also an offering. Luca begged to ride along. She nodded, and together they rolled toward the river town 20 miles north. Dust followed like a ghost, covering their shoulders in pale reminder of every road they'd walked to reach this fragile present. At the town edge they passed 2 families camped beside the levee, children coughing in clabbered shade. The woman left a burlap of potatoes, no words exchanged, only a tilt of the hat. Inside town, eyes followed her, whispers trailed. Hawthorne traded quietly, nails, salt, a spool of thread dyed rich blue. Luca marveled at storefronts, the first plate glass he had seen, reflections slicing him into bright fragments. But the ordnance posters were everywhere, on the saloon door, nailed to the church. She felt each paper tug at her breath. At the smithy they learned bounty hunters had ridden out dawn before, one bragging of gold coins already spent in his mind. Hawthorne touched the pocket where once lay those nuggets. The weight felt poisonous in memory. They left town before sunset, wagon heavier with seed corn and 2 new blanket rolls, lighter by almost everything else. Halfway home thunderheads towered, wind smelling of ozone and fear. A lone rider shadowed them along the ridge, too distant for face, close enough to read intent. Hawthorne slowed the mare. The woman reached beneath the seat for the shovel handle she had kept sharpened. Rain began in big drops, striking wagon boards like warning drums. The rider vanished into sheets of water, but his direction was clear, the valley. They urged the mare, wheels sliding in new mud, Luca clinging to the seed sacks to keep them from spilling. Lightning lit their path, the cedar-lined gate gleaming ahead like a promise still unbroken. Behind, thunder merged with hooves they could not see, only feel vibrating through the earth. They crossed the threshold just as darkness swallowed the last ridge. Hawthorne dropped the gate bar. Luca unhitched the mare, voice shaking but steady. The woman carried the shovel to the porch, planted its edge into wet dirt, and leaned one palm on the cedar beam, listening to rain race across the roof. Inside, lamplight trembled. She opened the ledger to a fresh page, dipped the pencil, and wrote 2 new words beneath the first, "We endure." Hawthorne read over her shoulder, then set the broken gold nugget, kept since auction as reminder, into the guttering flame of the lamp. It melted, hissed, pooled like sunlight captured and spent again. When only ash remained, he closed his hand around hers, both of them smelling smoke and rain and the iron tang of a future paid for in resolve, not metal. Outside, hoofbeats circled, testing wire and will. Rain drowned the harmonica's warning note, but they didn't need it now. Every heart in the house was already beating the alarm, steady and ready. The night held its breath, waiting to decide who truly owned the dark. Rain hammered the tin as night tightened. The hoofbeats kept circling, steady, patient, learning every corner of the wire. Inside, lamplight trembled across 3 faces and 1 cedar beam. No one spoke. Every breath sounded loud enough to give them away. The rider came at first lull, when the storm paused to gather strength. Hooves splashed through mud. The gate latch rattled once, twice, testing metal. Luca pressed himself against the hearth bricks. Hawthorne took the shovel from the porch, traded it for the forged stake he had buried weeks before, iron, weight balanced like a hammer meant to break bone. The woman lifted the lamp, shielded flame with her palm, ready to douse it the moment would cracked. Silence stretched. Only rain returning in soft sheets. Then a voice outside, low, confident, too smooth for these hills. "Paper for that woman. Gold for whoever signs." The words slithered through chinks in the wall. Hawthorne's jaw set. The woman closed her eyes once, opened them to steal. She moved to the door, laid her free hand against cedar. The carved word "stay" pressed cool beneath fingers. Another rattle at the latch, sharper. Hawthorne stepped forward, stake poised. But the woman shook her head. She unbarred the door, eased it open just wide enough that stormlight rimmed her silhouette. Wind whipped her dress against knees. Rain traced the scar on her wrist like writing. The rider sat tall on a pale horse, coat slicked black. Hat brim funneled water down his collar. He held a folded document, seal blurred by wet. Pistol at hip, hammer half-cocked. Eyes glittered like coins under lamplight. "Sign her over," he said, voice still calm. "No hurt, no fire. Law will thank you. Gold straight." The woman said nothing. She only raised the lamp higher, letting its glow reach Hawthorne beside her, Luca behind, the walls, the cedar sapling beyond the porch. Rain hissed across glass chimney, flames steady in her grip. The rider's gaze followed that light, measured shape of stake in Hawthorne's hand, the thin wire strung with harmonica, the barrels brimming from last storm. Wealth he could taste yet never carry. His horse sidestepped, sensing something colder than rain. He flicked reins. "Think. Lawman 10 miles back. They come sunrise. I'm off air an easy way." A smile that never touched eyes. The woman lowered the lamp until its reflection shone in puddles at her boots. She reached into pocket, drew out 3 small circles of lead, the musket balls she had picked from garden rows after the first raid. She dropped them into the puddle one by one. Plunk, plunk, plunk. The final ripple spread, merged with rain, disappeared. Her answer. Hawthorne stepped beyond the porch line, planting stake into mud between rider and gate. The iron tip struck rock, rang bright. A boundary named without syllable. For a breath the rider weighed odds. His pistol rose an inch. Luca's harmonica note trembled on the wire, thin but clear. The rider's horse shied, nostrils flaring. Lightning strobed, showing every shadow twice. When darkness returned, the rider wheeled and vanished into falling water, hooves slipping down the track until even sound drowned. Door closed. Bar slid home. The woman set lamp on table, flame shivering but alive. Luca let breath out slow, as though lungs were fragile glass. Storm spent itself toward dawn. Mud steamed under weak sun. No hoofprints remained, only churned mire and the iron stake standing sentinel. They left it planted, a new milepost. Day moved like someone carrying something heavy but cherished. Hawthorne sharpened scythe blades. The woman strung twine between bean poles. Luca patched the henhouse roof, humming off-key. Yet ears tilted for distant riders. None came by noon. Still none at dusk. Night clear, stars knife-sharp. They walked the fence line together, re-inspecting wire, nails, the tripstring. At the southwest post, they spotted a scrap of oilcloth snagged on barbs, the bounty hunter's coat torn fleeing. On it, a smear of wax seal. Proof the threat was real and not yet over. Next morning they saddled early. Hawthorne led them south along the ridge trail, following twin furrows left by heavy cavalry boots. Tall grass hid tracks but dew gleamed on crushed stems. 5 miles out, they found a burned chuck wagon, embers cold. Buzzards lifted from canvas lumps. 2 bounty men, throats cut, pockets turned. Papers scattered, warrants, slave registries, names stamped in careless ink. Among them, the woman saw her description, height, scar, price. She knelt, gathered the sheets, fed them to smoldering ash. Paper browned, curled, lifted on hot wind until sky erased every letter. Footprints led farther west, but they turned home. Dead men solved no futures. Living soil waited for seed. On the return, Luca spotted columbine blooming blue in a shaded arroyo. He picked 3 stems, handed one to each of them, kept one tucked behind his ear. Color against dust. Work resumed with new urgency. They trenched a ditch from creek to lower field, lining it with stone so water could run even in dry weeks. Hawthorne forged hinges for a smokehouse door. The woman salted meat while Luca chopped mesquite for coals. Smoke rose fragrant, drifting messages to anyone watching. We build, we stay. The territorial judge reached the valley 2 weeks later, entourage thin, just a clerk, a half-lame mule, fear sweating under wool coat. He carried news, law repealed, emancipation confirmed, bounties void. War in distant states had turned, and with it the papers that chained bodies lost power to chain. He asked for a bed, some coffee, and directions back to town before snow-closed passes. They gave him all 3 without ceremony. On his ledger he wrote their names as landowners. The woman spoke hers aloud at last, Amara. The judge wrote it twice to be sure, ink blotting a moment, then drying. When he left, Luca hammered a fresh plank over the gate, burned letters into pine, L. Ranch, Amara, Marcus Hawthorne, Luca. 3 lives in one line, grain blackened but strong. Autumn swelled gold. Corn silk shimmered, potatoes bulged, beans climbed until they tangled flags of dried pods. Amara harvested, hands quick, scar fading to pale memory. Hawthorne fenced the north meadow, mare heavy with foal. Luca attended school in the valley church twice a week, returning with words he spelled out loud until they felt like seeds in his mouth. One dusk, smoke rose again on southern horizon, but smaller, wandering. Refugee wagons, travelers seeking wintering ground. Amara loaded sacks of corn onto sled, rode the mule to meet them. She found mothers thin as fence pickets, children hacking coughs, fathers long since buried. She offered food, a patch of creek bank for tents, water without price. One woman asked what they owed. Amara pointed to the sky. Pay forward, she said, and felt the words settle easy on her tongue. Nights cooled. Frost silvered the porch rail where the stake once braced the door. Inside, cedar fire popped. Hawthorne set 2 cups by the hearth, waited. Amara came from the doorway, dusted snowflakes from her shoulders, sat. They shared silence as always, but it sounded different now, less like hiding, more like home stretching its limbs. She opened the ledger, turned to blank page, dipped pen in walnut ink, wrote, "We welcome the weary." Hawthorne added beneath, "Land feeds what hearts plant." Luca, sprawled on rug, drew a crooked sun above their words, rays touching both lines. Outside, wind rattled cartridge chimes, not in warning but in song. The iron stake at the field edge caught moonlight, shining like a star that chose earth instead of sky. And somewhere beyond, a lone coyote called, no alarm, just greeting, to a valley no longer afraid of night. Wind sharpened after the harvest, turning creek water to glass and corn stalks to rattles. Frost thickened each dawn, hardening hoofprints before the sun could soften them. The valley hushed, listening for snow. Amara woke early, breath curling white in lamplight, and fed the stove cedar chips until iron sweated heat. Hawthorne lingered outside, tracing fence wire for weak knots, shoulders dusted with hoarfrost that caught first light like powdered silver. Luca ran messages between homesteads now scattered along the creek, refugees folded into neighbors, his boots thudding on frozen earth in quick, bright rhythms. One evening he returned alone, face pale beneath new freckles. A stranger had reached the outer camp, a woman coughing dry, her 2 children listless. Rumor said sickness followed the wagon trail west, lungs filling, breath thinning, no cures but prayer and distance. Hawthorne saddled the mare, gathered ash bark and peppermint from Amara's herb shelf, and rode into dusk. Amara banked the fire, boiled blankets, ground willow bark to dust. Luca kept water hot through the night, eyes wide with the weight of whispers. Hawthorne came back at dawn, clothes smelling of pine smoke and fever. He wiped blood from his sleeve, his own, scraped where a latch hook tore skin, and said nothing of how many lay coughing in the dark. Amara washed the cut with snowmelt steeped in sage, wrapped it tight, and pressed his hand once, firm. He met her gaze, full of news too heavy for language. They understood without words. The valley was no longer only theirs to guard, it was breathing the same air as strangers, and that air carried blades unseen. Days blurred into vigilance. Amara brewed tinctures, carried jars to campfires where mothers rocked restless infants. Luca hauled bucket after bucket from the creek, palms raw beneath gloves. Hawthorne felled deadwood for pyres, the scent of resin mixing with distant smoke. At night they returned to AML Ranch, boots caked in frost and ash, clothes hung outside so illness could not follow indoors. One bitter dusk Hawthorne's knees buckled while splitting kindling. The axe fell wide, buried in snow. Amara crossed the yard fast, caught his shoulder before it found earth. His skin burned, eyes glazed like pond ice. She guided him to bed, poured willow brew between clenched teeth, stayed beside him as fever climbed. Luca stoked the fire, silent tears making tracks through soot on his cheeks. For 3 days Hawthorne drifted. He'd rouse, murmur Amara's name only to lose it again in dream heat. She wiped sweat, blew cool breaths against his brow, murmured stories of green shoots and future calves. On the 4th morning fever broke like brittle glass, steam lifted from his skin. He woke to the scent of cedar, the sound of Luca's repaired harmonica humming low, and Amara resting at his bedside, eyes closed but alert even in sleep. Snow fell thick that week, closing passes, silencing rumors for a while. Illness waned, survivors mended fences together, grief held in common. When Hawthorne could walk, he ventured to the ridge with Amara. Below, new chimneys dotted the valley, smoke rising straight in windless air. She slipped her hand into his glove, felt his pulse steady as fence posts. Neither spoke, the hush said enough. Ice months deepened. Wolves tested the outer herds, drawn by easy pickings among goats. One moonless night their howls braided with wind until Luca bolted upright from bed. He and Amara found Hawthorne already saddling the mare, rifle slung. Amara lifted the iron stake kept by the door, symbol turned spear. They rode out, hooves muffled by snow, lantern light bobbed ahead like a cautious star. At the far corral 3 wolves circled crying kids. Hawthorne fired once, shot wide on purpose. 2 shadows melted into timber. The last lunged at the lantern, teeth catching rim. Amara stepped forward, stake raised. She struck the frozen ground in front of the beast, sending sparks of frost. The wolf paused, yellow eyes reflecting flame. Hawthorne's voice, low as distant thunder, rolled through the dark, not command, not threat, just presence. The wolf backed away, vanished between drifts. Lantern glass cracked but held. Returning home, Amara set the weakened flame on the porch rail. Snowflakes hissed against it and died. Hawthorne brushed her cloak free of ice, lingering a heartbeat longer than necessity. Luca pressed into their sides, shivering, though fear had already fled. Together they watched the valley exhale mist, grateful the dark had retreated without blood. Winter's tail loosened, days stretched amber. Calves wobbled on slick earth, breathed steam like miniature trains. Refugee children sled down the north hill on grain sacks, laughter echoing between thawing trees. Amara and Hawthorne repaired the cracked lantern, fitting new glass trimmed from a discarded whiskey bottle. Its green glow at dusk painted snowmelt pools jade, a quiet promise that broken things could shine different yet whole. When moon climbed high, Amara stepped away from lantern glow, heartbeat steady as crickets. Hawthorne followed, boots quiet. They met at the rail where cartridge chimes chimed softer now, metal edges turned smooth by wind. He opened his palm, 2 plain copper bands hammered from spare pipe, edges buffed satin. She traced one circle, finding warmth already there. No vows rose, none needed. He slipped the band over her scar-flecked wrist, she over his calloused finger, rings taking shapes their flesh would remember long after metal dulled. Morning painted everything new. The foal, grown sure-footed, frisked beside its mother. Windmill creaked to steady him. The valley shimmered with stubble and promise. Amara saddled the mule, rode fence line, noting gaps only she could see, the kind that open not in wire but in hearts easing into peace. At the south rise she stopped, looking back. Patchwork fields, smoke plumes gentle, roofs glinting like scattered coins no thief could pocket. She tasted the sight the way some taste fresh water, knowing it can be both gift and responsibility. She returned near dusk, wagon loaded with river stones for a new foundation wall. Hawthorne and Luca met her at the gate, now embellished with carved barley heads and the foal's name Providence. They unloaded stones until stars salted the sky, until sweat cooled into contentment. Fire cracked inside. Children clustered by the hearth, elder refugees threading stories through pine-scented air. Amara slipped onto the porch, quill in hand, the last blank leaf from a fresh ledger resting on her thigh. She wrote slow, measured lines. The land was once a question. We answered with staying. Freedom was once a price. We paid with yielding nothing but love. She dried ink, set the page inside, closed the book. Hawthorne joined, leaning silent, shoulder brushing hers. Luca's laughter drifted through open window, fiddle strings chased it. Night felt infinite and near, as if any hush could bloom into song. Across the yard the iron stake caught starlight, sending a thin gleam toward the sapling, signal passed from metal to wood, from yesterday's defense to tomorrow's growth. Amara watched that gleam, breathed out, felt her chest echo hollow no longer. The wind shifted, carrying scents of harvest fires and river fog and new forged iron. She knew storms would return, wolves, drought, laws rewritten by distant hands. But storms would find a valley rooted, wolves a fence watched, drought a windmill turning, laws a people already decided on their own terms. Nothing built on chains could outlast soil bound by circles and squares entwined. She closed her eyes, listening. Cartridge chimes, rustle of barley stubble, hoof tap, distant lullaby sung for hope. All threaded into one quiet declaration, home not as shelter but as choice repeated, deedless yet unbreakable. A single shooting star crossed blackness, brief and bright. She opened her eyes to catch its tail, whispered thanks to whatever sky keeps such secrets. Hook your heart to this story? Let the fire grow. Hit like, subscribe, and tell down in the comments what moment branded itself into you. What echo called you home? Your voice keeps this valley alive.